Finishing getting the YouTube set up, and then we'll be ready to go. And it is working.
It is cold outside.
Yes, it is. Yes, it is. All right. It is a nice, chilly January here in Orlando, Florida, but, you know, the rest of the country has it much, much worse. And I hope they're all doing fine. If not, they can come down to visit if that is safe for them. We are beginning a new chapter. We are not quite halfway through the Masechet, through Chullin, but we are beginning chapter 5 tonight. And chapter 5 is going to start with a topic that I would imagine most of you have not routinely considered. This is a topic that comes up very commonly in the holiday readings for the Torah, as well as in the Torah itself, Leviticus 22:28. But it is something that unless you slaughter your own cows and sheep, you probably have not had to consider. As such, it may seem unfamiliar, but this is a very important prohibition, and as one that you'll see that has many different aspects and permutations. So let's go ahead and jump in. We're going to start with Rabbi Kolp's commentary giving us a little introduction to help make sure that we're all up to speed on what the basic formula of the prohibition is. Like I said, this comes from Leviticus chapter 22, verse 28. When it comes to an ox or a sheep, it and its young, you shall not slaughter on the same day, right? So you have a cow and you have its baby and you want to have extra meat. You cannot slaughter both the mother as well as the child on the same day. You can slaughter them one on Monday and one on Tuesday, but you cannot slaughter them both on Monday. And exactly how that works and why we will begin to explain as we go through. So the Mishnah reads, the law of it and its young, which is the shorthand technical phrase for this particular prohibition, applies both within the land of Israel and outside it, both during the existence of the temple and after it, in respect of both unconsecrated and consecrated animals. Now, all three of those stipulations need to be said. There are some mitzvot that only apply within the land of Israel, but not outside of it. There are some mitzvot that are only relevant when the temple stands and not when it's destroyed. And there are some mitzvot that are only relevant for an animal that is dedicated for the temple, but does not apply for an animal not dedicated, and some vice versa. So it's important to recognize, to recognize that our phones should be put on silence so that it doesn't bug me for the entire class. It is important to recognize that this particular prohibition of not slaughtering the mother with the child on the same day still applies right now to this day, whether you live in Eretz Israel or whether you live in Chutz La'aretz, outside of Israel, for example, here in the United States. So this is still a relevant mitzvah, even if most of us never pick up a knife. How so? Well, we need to get into some different scenarios to see what happens under different sets of circumstances. And as we're going to see, the issue that's going to be, or not the issue, the system that's going to be used is, since we are dealing with two animals, the mother and the child, we have to then adjust the different setting or conditions for the slaughter of each of them to uncover the ruling under each of the different logical permutations. After we get going, you'll see the pattern, and it should make it much more obvious at that point. So, if a person slaughtered an animal and its young, both animals being unconsecrated, and they slaughtered them outside, meaning not in the temple area, then both are valid. That is to say, they are kosher, but he who slaughters the second incurs 40 lashes. So this is our vanilla case, if you will, our basic idea. You have two animals, neither of them are dedicated to the temple, and both of them are being slaughtered outside the temple area, just two regular animals being butchered. Okay, in that case, standard violation, that means whoever slaughters the second animal is going to receive 40 lashes. 40 lashes is the standard liability for somebody that violates a biblical prohibition when they were properly warned. Now, the slaughterer who took care of the first animal, they do not receive any punishment. So the specific category is that you have to be the one who slaughters the second animal. Now, the fact that there are two different slaughterers will become important later on in our study tonight. But at the moment, you don't need to get too fixated on that. The main thing to know is that the first slaughter does not become prohibited retroactively just because somebody slaughtered the second animal after the fact, even if you are the person who slaughtered both of them. Of also significant importance is the fact that both of them are kosher. Again, assuming that you've done the slaughter correctly, that even though you have transgressed the prohibition on slaughtering the second animal on the same day as the first, that does not change the kashrut of the animal. You are liable for violating the mitzvah of not slaughtering them, but the animals themselves do not become treifa, nor do they become nevela. They are considered whatever their status is from the original slaughter. If you slaughter them correctly and there was no disqualifying situation, then you are free to eat from both of them. But the one that slaughtered the second one is liable to lashes, the standard 40 being the penalty for violating a Torah prohibition. All right. Any questions or comments on that vanilla case? Because if we don't have that down, then it's only going to get worse. All right. I'm not seeing anything in YouTube and no one's unmuting to ask a question. Beautiful. Let's get to the second part. Now, two different animals, and we're going to tweak the situation. If both animals were consecrated and they were slaughtered outside the sanctuary, the one who slaughtered the first incurs the penalty of karet. Both animals are invalid, and each incurs 40 lashes. All right. So here we have two animals that have been dedicated for the temple, and they are being slaughtered outside the temple. Now, immediately you should be able to tell that's a bad thing. You are not allowed to slaughter a consecrated animal outside the temple. And indeed, that is why the first person receives the penalty of karet. They receive the penalty of excision, which we talked about in Masechet Kritot, because they have committed this transgression. Likewise, both animals are invalid, meaning they are not kosher, meaning you can't eat for them, not because they are not kosher, meaning it's not because of the normal kashrut issues, but because a sacrifice that is slaughtered outside the temple immediately becomes invalid and you cannot eat from it for that reason. And you are then punished by having the 40 lashes in the two cases. All right, is case number 2 here. That is to say, the two animals that are consecrated being slaughtered outside the temple. Is that fairly clear?
Rabbi.
Yes.
Are those animals mother and daughter?
It is definitely mother, but it could be mother and son or daughter, meaning it could be the mother cow and a baby cow that's a boy or a baby cow that's a girl. I should also point out that it doesn't have to be a baby. Both these cows could be very mature, that there is no expiration on the parentage connection here.
So Rabbi, then does the person who slaughters the second one, how come he doesn't get 2 sets of 40?
All right. So the second one, hold on a second. Before I get to that, the second one, okay, we'll do the second one first. The second one is not considered to be a valid sacrifice because you couldn't do a sacrifice with the relative of the first one on the same day. So by definition, it's not a sacrifice at that point. The first one is a sacrifice, it's just wrong. But the second one is no longer possible to be called a sacrifice because it is violating the rule of not slaughtering the two on the same day. So the second one just becomes an invalid slaughter that is punished for the invalid slaughtering.
So you can eat the second one then, right?
No, both of them are considered to be ineligible because the second one may not have actually been a sacrifice, but it was still consecrated. And because it is consecrated, you're not allowed to eat it unless it was actually sacrificed correctly. So the meat from both animals is off limits, but for different reasons. Well, actually, the meat's off limits for different reasons. The penalties are different for different reasons. But getting back to the question of the mother and the child, there is a debate about whether or not, if you slaughter the father of the animal with a child, of whether you are also violating the same commandment. And that is because of an ambiguity in the original Torah text of it sounds like it could also be talking about the male parent. Now, the difficulty with that is that we don't always know who the male parent is for an animal. A cow may, depending upon the circumstance, and a sheep even more likely, have relations while in heat with numerous bulls or rams. So it may be impossible to identify the father, whereas the mother is much easier to ascertain because that's what the baby came out of. Even in a case, however, where the father is definitively identified, meaning there is only one bull or is only one ram, there is still doubt of whether or not that is what the Torah was intending, as it seems to be discussing in its most archetypical case, the taking of a child from the mother, the removal of a young animal from the mother which it is still attached to. Even though it applies later than that, that is the archetypical example. And as such, we know that among most animal species, in particular cows and sheep, that the mother and the child have a much stronger bond than the father and the child do. Indeed, the father may not even know it is the father among many animal species. So it would seem to be indicating that this mitzvah is trying to also grow within us a sense of compassion for the closeness that is shared between the mother animal and the child animal. There are, however, many opinions that say, nonetheless, we also shouldn't, out of doubt, slaughter the male suspected father with the child on the same day. But that's another line of discussion. Okay. Third case. Actually, if you'll give me a moment. I was talking all afternoon at religious school and I need to refresh the vocal cords. If both animals were unconsecrated and they were slaughtered inside the sanctuary, both animals are invalid, and he who slaughtered the second incurs 40 lashes. So here we are changing the situation. Now we are going back to unconsecrated animals, just regular old cows or sheep, but they are being slaughtered inside the sanctuary area. They are being brought to the temple. Now, if you bring something to the temple that is not consecrated and slaughter it there, it is forbidden. Now, this is read according to the idea of if the temple is too far from you, then you should slaughter in your home, and that would be a regular slaughter. And that reason from the Torah is read in the inverse by the rabbis to mean that if you are only doing a regular slaughter, then you shouldn't do it in your home. But since it is read out of a negative from a positive commandment, then it is not considered to be punished. That is why the first slaughterer, even though they are slaughtering an unconsecrated animal within the temple, which is not something you should do, does not receive a specific punishment. However, since they did slaughter where they weren't supposed to, the meat from that animal is invalid. The second animal, the meat is also invalid because you were slaughtered where it shouldn't be. But since they are also slaughtering the child or the mother of the other animal that was slaughtered, they received the 40 lashes for violating the slaughter of a parent and the young on the same day. That logic makes sense. These are, if you're paying attention, a very straightforward logic case where we have two that are A, two that are not A, two that are A but in B, two that are not A but in B. They are building up the different cases to work through all the different squares of a logic puzzle. And on paragraph 7, our final portion of this one, we deal with the fourth case, which deals with the only remaining category that we haven't covered. If both animals were consecrated and they were slaughtered inside the sanctuary, the first is valid, and he who slaughtered it is not culpable, meaning there is no penalty for anything that he did. But he who slaughtered the second incurs 40 lashes, and it is invalid. So now we have consecrated animals being slaughtered where they should be at the temple. But again, we have the parent-child problem. And in this case, the first slaughter is, as you would expect, a perfectly valid slaughter, and thus the meat of it is perfectly valid. But the second one, well, they are slaughtering where they should, so there's no special penalty for that, but they have slaughtered the young or the parent of the young on the same day, and thus they receive the 40 lashes in penalty for that. The chiddush, the novelty that we haven't seen yet, is that that second case would render the animal invalid, meaning the meat would not be valid, because for slaughtering it inappropriately in the temple, since you shouldn't slaughter the animal on that day, it creates a invalidity for the sacrifice, and thus the meat is not allowed because it was an improper offering. So this is a stringency, if you will, compared to slaughtering two unconsecrated animals outside the temple, which was our first case, because in that case, both animals' meat was permitted. Okay. If you've got that pattern down, you're in good shape for Mishnah 2, because Mishnah 2 is going to say, wait a minute. In Mishnah 1, both animals had the same status and both animals were slaughtered in the same place. But they don't have to be. Technically, one could be consecrated and one could be non-consecrated. Technically, one could be slaughtered at the temple and one could not be. So we've got a few more permutations to work through, a few more combos. If the first animal was unconsecrated and the second consecrated, and they were both slaughtered outside the sanctuary, the first is valid, and he who slaughtered it is not liable, as is fairly obvious. That is just a regular slaughter of a regular animal outside the temple. But he who slaughtered the second incurs 40 lashes, and it is invalid. This indeed follows the same pattern we saw before, but here for only the second half, that because it was consecrated but slaughtered outside, then it is considered to be an invalid sacrifice, and the meat of it is invalid, and the person is slaughtered. You will note, as Rabbi Kolb points out in the commentary, that the slaughterer of the second one does not receive karet, even though the first person who slaughtered in this similar case in Mishnah 1 did, because the second person slaughtering is slaughtering an animal that is impossible to be a valid sacrifice because it is the parent-young combo, and thus it is simply an invalid use of a consecrated animal, but not an invalid sacrifice. So this is why I think Mishnah is so much better than doing Wordle or Sudoku for keeping your brain sharp. It's following all of the permutations is just a great way of making sure that you're paying careful attention to all the details. Part 3, or paragraph 3 by Rabbi Kolb's breakdown from Mishnah 2. If the first was consecrated and the second unconsecrated, and they were both slaughtered outside the sanctuary, he who slaughtered the first incurs the penalty of karet, and it is invalid, and the second animal is valid, and each incurs 40 lashes. So the first person has violated the prohibition on slaughtering a consecrated animal outside the sanctuary. So that animal was potentially valid, thus it is considered to be a wrong sacrifice, and that is why they are given the penalty of karet, and it is also why the meat is considered not kosher, it is invalid. The second person, on the other hand, they are slaughtering an unconsecrated animal outside the sanctuary, so just like our first case in Mishnah 1, that meat is perfectly kosher, but they did slaughter the second one as the second, and thus they are violating the overall prohibition of slaughtering parent and young, and thus they receive 40 lashes for that. The first, of course, is being lashed for slaughtering a consecrated animal outside the temple. All right, part 4. If the first was unconsecrated and the second consecrated, and both were slaughtered inside the sanctuary. Notice that we have changed the location from our previous set. They are both invalid, and he who slaughtered the second incurs 40 lashes. All right, so we have an unconsecrated animal being slaughtered inside the sanctuary. That's not valid, and thus you can't eat the meat of it. And you have no additional penalty because, as we said before, the slaughtering of an unconsecrated animal within the temple is derived as an inverse of the positive commandment of slaughtering outside the temple, and thus it doesn't incur a biblical penalty, but it is still invalid. Number 2 person, however, the person who slaughtered the consecrated animal inside the temple, this person slaughtered second, and as such, they have violated the commandment of not slaughtering the parent and the young on the same day, and they have also offered an invalid sacrifice because they have transgressed. Don't sacrifice the parent and child on the same day. So the meat is invalid, and they are punished for that second slaughter. All right. Hopefully it's all beginning to make sense. You're beginning to see the patterns. Let's move on to part 5. If the first was consecrated and the second was unconsecrated, and they were both slaughtered inside the sanctuary, so this is the flip side of paragraph 4, the first animal is valid, a consecrated animal inside the sanctuary, perfectly normal, no problem, and he who slaughtered it is not liable, he did nothing wrong. But he who slaughtered the second incurs 40 lashes, and it is invalid. Quite obvious by this point, because of the slaughter of an unconsecrated animal within the sanctuary, we know that its meat is invalid. And because of the violation of slaughtering it and its young, the parent and child, on the same day, he receives 40 lashes. All right, paragraph 6, continuing our complication. Now we are going to make things a little bit different. If both were unconsecrated, so we're back to sharing the same status of animal, but the first was slaughtered outside the sanctuary and the second inside, right? So you take 2 regular animals and you slaughter one of them just out in your farm and the other one inside the temple, all on the same day. The first one is valid, of course, because that's just a regular slaughter of an animal back on the farm. And the one who slaughtered it is not liable because he did nothing wrong. But the one who slaughtered the second incurs 40 lashes, and it is invalid. The second one is slaughtering an unconsecrated animal inside the temple. So, of course, the meat is invalid, as we have established. And because they are slaughtering the second animal of the pair, they are liable for the 40 lashes. Okay. Let's flip it around. If both were consecrated, right, now they've both been dedicated for sacrifices, and the first was slaughtered outside the sanctuary and the second inside, he who slaughtered the first incurs the penalty of karet, because he is making a sacrifice outside the temple, and each incur 40 lashes, the first for doing the slaughter outside, the second for doing the slaughter of the second. And both animals are invalid. One, because it is being slaughtered as an inappropriate sacrifice for the number two, because you can't sacrifice both animals on the same day. So number two couldn't have been a sacrifice. And the first, because it was a sacrifice done outside of the temple. Okay. Paragraph 8, let's flip it again. This is actually going back and flipping the other aspects of paragraph number 6. If both were unconsecrated, and the first was slaughtered inside the sanctuary, inside the temple, and the second outside, all right, so we have flipped the location of these two unconsecrated animals. The first is invalid because you can't slaughter an unconsecrated animal inside the sanctuary. And he who slaughtered it is not liable. As I mentioned, it's not valid, but there is no specific penalty for it. But he who slaughtered the second incurs 40 lashes, because you can't slaughter the second animal of it and its young on the same day. But because it was unconsecrated and it was done outside the temple, there's nothing wrong with the meat. It is still kosher. And then not Mishnah, but paragraph number 9 flips it with consecrated animals. If both were consecrated and the first was slaughtered inside the sanctuary and the second outside, the first is valid because it is a consecrated animal being slaughtered in the temple. That's normal. And he who slaughtered it is not liable because he did nothing wrong. But he who slaughtered the second incurs 40 lashes and it is invalid. So here again, we have two consecrated animals, and we are flipping the scenario where we have now the second animal being the one that's being slaughtered away from the temple. As such, that second slaughter is considered to be inappropriate and its meat is invalid. Now you may be thinking to yourself, but wait a minute, what about karet? The second person slaughtered an animal outside of the temple's precincts that was dedicated for a sacrifice. Doesn't that mean it's karet because you are slaughtering an animal outside? Nope, because the first one was already slaughtered. That means that by definition, number 2 of this parent-child combo cannot be a proper sacrifice, and therefore they are not doing a sacrifice, even if that's what they thought they were doing. So they do not suffer karet. However, they have still slaughtered an animal that was dedicated for the temple, outside the temple, and that incurs the 40 lash penalty for that activity. And of course, it is invalid, meaning the consecrated meat cannot be eaten. All right. Now, you may be thinking to yourself, Rabbi, please, let's do a few more logic puzzles, but we're not going to. All right, we're going to take a little bit of a break, and we're going to deal with a different issue of slaughtering pairs. We're still dealing with parent-child slaughter, even though it doesn't make it clear at the beginning. So just keep that in mind. If a person slaughtered an animal and found it to be treifa, or if he slaughtered it as an offering to idols, or if he slaughtered the red cow, the para aduma, the cow that was slaughtered in order to prepare its ashes to cleanse people from the ritual impurity that comes from the contact with the dead, or the heifer whose neck was to be broken, which was slaughtered, killed as part of the ritual for when there is a body found where no murderer can be ascertained. Rabbi Shimon exempts him from having transgressed the law of it and its young, but the sages make him liable. So the issue here that they're arguing about is it really a slaughter if it wasn't actually a slaughter, right? This is kind of like if a tree falls in the forest and there's no one around, does it make any sound, right? If you slaughter an animal, but it's not really a fit animal to be slaughtered, either because it was treifa, it was suffering from one of these wounds, or if it was being offered to idols, or if it was being offered for these other purposes. I forgot to explain the ox which was condemned to be stoned. Right, that is an ox that has gored, that has to be killed after it has murdered someone. In all of these cases, we are not allowed to use any of the meat of any of these animals. So it's like they're already dead. It's like they don't really count. So Rabbi Shimon says that doesn't really count as a slaughtering. Therefore, it shouldn't count against the slaughtering of it and its young on the same day. However, the sages say, no, it is still the killing of the two animals on the same day. And as such, it falls under that, that penalty, and you would still receive the 40 lashes. Any questions on that portion? I'll just roll down a bit so that people can also see the rest of Rabbi Kolp's commentary. And it gives me a chance to take a sip.
But what true? There's only one. In my translation, there is no two animals.
Right. So they're talking about if one of the animals was one of these. So if the first animal that was slaughtered was found to be treifa, and then you slaughter the second one, Rabbi Shimon would say that's okay. But the sages say, no, it's not, because you're still slaughtering the parent and the child on the same day.
Rabbi.
So you cannot slaughter on the same day. It doesn't matter, because in all your previous examples were in different places.
Right. And the main issue here is all of the category of animals being discussed in this one, which, like I said, would be one of the pairs that would be in the slaughter of the parent and child. In all of these cases, the food from it is not really food, because I'm not allowed to eat treifa. I'm not allowed to eat something offered to idols. I'm not allowed to eat the red heifer. I'm not allowed to eat an ox which was stoned. And I'm not allowed to eat the heifer that had its neck broken. So Rabbi Shimon says, well, if you can't eat it, it shouldn't count, because it's not really food. And the sages say, yeah, but it is really slaughtered. You may not have intended it or the right way, and it may have not been appropriate to eat, but it was still killed. And thus you can't kill the other one on the same day. So the rabbis are taking a broader view of killing. Rabbi Shimon wants to make it a narrow view. And the sages do win the argument here. Yes, Aaron, you have your hand up?
Yes, Rabbi. Has anybody ever extended the ox metaphor? Because that one's interesting. The ox is being killed because it killed someone else. Yet my understanding is this mitzvah was to show mercy to the animals. So they're trying to be compassionate to an ox that just murdered someone.
Well, it's not a question of being compassionate to it because it murdered someone. It is being compassionate to it despite it having murdered someone. And murdered is not quite the right word, because we don't believe that there was full intentionality behind the animal. But Judaism does, even with humans, I should say rather, especially with humans, still believe in showing compassion and dignity to those that are receiving the death penalty. Just because somebody is going to be executed doesn't mean we treat them like an animal. It doesn't mean that we rob them of their dignity. We still execute them as appropriate under the proper court procedures that Judaism lays out, which are very stringent. But even in the process of executing them, we do so with allowing their dignity to remain as intact as absolutely possible. So I don't find any contradiction of sparing an ox that is condemned to be stoned on one day because its relative was just killed. That I don't see that as a contradiction. We can still take care of the stoning tomorrow, or if we stoned it, we can still postpone the slaughter of its offspring for another day as well.
Yeah, no, I was actually wondering if there's I think the word's fiatory argument. If you were to be compassionate to the animals, then all the more so to a human.
Okay, like a kal v'chomer, right? And yes, I will say that in general, this whole mitzvah of of showing compassion to the animals, and indeed any of the mitzvot would show compassion to the animals, Rambam very famously argues were intended not just so that we would be nice to animals, but that we would train us through being nice to animals to all the more so be nice to other human beings. It turns out not everybody works that way. There are people who are nice to their pets that are absolute terrible people to each other, to other human beings. But by and large, it does work well. If you raise someone to be good to animals, it does put them in a more empathetic and a more sympathetic and more compassionate mode. And that does usually have an effect on how they treat other people. It's certainly a great place to start. That's one reason why if you see a person mistreating animals, you can be relatively confident that they are going to mistreat human beings as well. Yes, Natan.
So what happens if you kill the its mother, kid, or could be also father and kid?
So I think I might have explained before you came on, but the absolute rule is the mother and child. But there are opinions because of the way the Torah phrases it that say it could be the father, but it's hard to know with animals who the father is. But out of doubt, most authorities say don't slaughter the father as well. But if one does, then usually the penalties are not the same. So, but for the moment, let's focus mostly on the mother-child.
So what happened? And you say that they cannot be killed on the same day.
Correct. Well, the Torah says that, not me.
No, means in your explanation, okay?
Yes.
And you cannot, for all the examples, you cannot kill them in a different place, but in the Mishkan, in the temple.
No, you can kill them anywhere. If you kill them in your yard, it's wrong. If you kill them in the temple, it's wrong. That's what Mishnahs 1 and 2 were trying to establish.
No, I mean, okay, so what happened if, okay, and that was my question.
Okay.
You take one to the temple, okay, as a nice person, and you don't know that someone at home, without knowing by mistake, they killed the other one at home.
Okay.
Like a mistake. You know what happened? I didn't know all the other side. What happened, for example, if something like that happened and you discover later they were related?
Right. So excellent question. We're going to get into some of the precautions on this in just another little bit. But the basic question that you're asking is a very important one, and one that if we look at the text and we try to remember how Torah makes us liable for being flogged, we have to understand that this had to be done consciously, right? That this could not be done accidentally, that it has to be the person said, I know this is the relative of the one that's already been slaughtered, and I'm going to slaughter it anyway. If it was done completely accidentally, then yes, it is a chet, it is a sin, but it is an accidental sin, and the requirement then is doing tshuva, the sacrifice to the temple in the days that the temple still stood, but tshuva alone in the modern world where we don't have the sacrificial system. So this is all of the talk of flogging is about when you knowingly did this. If it was accidental, then it was an accident. Yes, you still do tshuva, you still have to repent, you still have to offer a sacrifice in the days of the altar, but you don't have to be flogged if you did it completely by mistake. But we're going to still look a little later tonight at some of the precautions to avoid the accidental doing of this. Because like you said, sometimes things could happen that might make that more likely. And we will be looking at that a little later. Yes, Aaron.
Hey, Rabbi, just out of curiosity, the commentary on the father, where does that come in?
In which way? You mean where is it discussed?
Yeah, is it the Mishnah, Talmud, or other?
If I remember from when I was reading about it, it was in the Midrash, the Midrash Halacha in Sifra, and then other commentators begin discussing it.
So
But I read
today-
it in a commentary about the commentary, so I'm going off their citation rather than my own firsthand reading.
So
Yes?
today, many rabbis also accept that you cannot, if you know who is the dad. And by the way, you can know who is the dad because, for example, I remember when I worked in a refit, we know who was the cow, the sperm from the cow, which cow specifically, because you want to improve
Yes.
the generation, so you know exactly. Oh, this is a good one. So in this case, you know exactly what this is. So if you know, it's by today is accepted by halacha for majority of the rabbi that you cannot kill them on the same day.
Correct. The general majority opinion of what I have seen is that if you know the father, everyone agrees you shouldn't do it. But even if you aren't sure who's the father, if you think you know, you still shouldn't, just to be machmir. I mean, we're only talking about a day difference. We're not talking about never eating the animal. We're just talking about a temporary postponement. All right, so that is the first part of Mishnah 5.3. Let's take a look at paragraph 2. If a person slaughtered an animal and it became nivela under his hand, or he stabbed it or tore away, meaning the parts of the throat that we've talked about previously, he does not thereby transgress the law of it and its young. All right, so this is probably going to be a little like, wait a minute, but if you are slaughtering the animal, but you don't slaughter it, meaning you kill the animal instead, you do it in a way that is not actually slaughter. The animal is still dead, but you didn't actually slaughter it. Now, since the Torah specifically says regarding shchita, slaughter, that means you have not violated the law of of killing the mother and the child on the same day. So technically, you're off the hook. Now, the meat is still invalid because it was slaughtered completely inappropriately, but you have not violated the mitzvah of not killing the mother and child on the same day. So it may look like you're getting off the hook, even though you're killing it worse, but that is because of the specific language of the original mitzvah, which says slaughter as a technical term, as opposed to just the word kill. I'd still recommend not doing that, but and we're talking here about the specific Torah prohibition. All right, and now we get into a little bit more complicated of who's doing the slaughtering and what do each other know. So, if two people bought a cow and its young, meaning two different people, right? One person buys the cow, one person buys the child. The one who bought first can slaughter first. Right? I walk out of the farm and I'm bringing my cow with me, and you're walking out behind me bringing the young cow. I got dibs on slaughtering because I bought mine first. Therefore, I have the right first to slaughter it. However, if the second preceded him, he holds advantage, right? So that means that if the second person goes ahead and slaughters first anyway, they jump the gun, even though it's not technically their turn, the second person or the first person does have to wait. Even though they had the right to go first, because the second person has already slaughtered once, that means the first person has to wait until tomorrow anyway. They can't violate the mitzvah, even though they had dibs on going first. Right? It's like when children are arguing about who gets to go first and who gets to go second. It's like if one of them goes ahead and, takes a bite out of the cake with, when it wasn't supposed to, I'm still not going to eat that cake, especially not with COVID going around that someone has bit into. They shouldn't have done it, but it does limit my choices once they have done it. Yes, Aaron.
Rabbi, is there no penalty for jumping the gun?
None that I could come across, except obviously for censure. that you are going to be held in quite low esteem in your community for having broken the rules. All right, now we get another permutation. This time we're going multi-generational. If a person slaughtered a cow and then 2 of its calves, he is liable for 80 lashes, right? Because you have violated the mitzvah twice, you are liable for 80 lashes. Because you killed 2 of its young, you doubly violated the mitzvah, right? If I steal $100 from one person and $100 from another person, I'm going to be paying back minimum $200. If he slaughtered its 2 calves and then the cow, he is liable for 40 lashes, right? So I slaughter the younger cows first. Well, when I slaughter the second of the young cows, I have not done anything wrong. I'm allowed to kill 2 brother cows on the same day, no problem. It's only when I slaughter the mother that I have now transgressed. And since I'm only slaughtering one mother, because there can be only one mother, then I am only liable for 1 violation and thus 40 lashes. If he slaughtered it and then its calf, and then the calf's offspring, meaning the grandchild of the first cow, he is liable for 80 lashes. When I slaughter the first cow, or when I slaughter the first calf, the child, right, that's 1 violation, 40 lashes. When I slaughter the grandchild, well, the grandchild is the child of the child, so that is a different violation, and thus another 40 lashes. If he slaughtered it, and then its calf's offspring, and then the calf, he is liable for 40 lashes. So here it's, you slaughter the mother, and then the grandchild, and then the child. Well, when you slaughter the child, you haven't done anything wrong, right? Because it's not connected to the mother. But then when you slaughter the child, that one action is what triggers in either relationship the 40 lashes. And since you have slaughtered only one, since you have infringed on the mitzvah with only 1 slaughter, you are only liable for 1 violation. Now,
so you can kill the grandmother and the kid, not jumping over
yes. If you slaughter the mother and the grandchild, meaning the grandmother and grandchild on the same day, that's okay. You have not violated the mitzvah.
Okay.
Now, Simakos says in the name of Rebbe Meir that he is liable for 40 lashes. Now, Rebbe Meir, of course, is going with you slaughtered the mother and the child, and you slaughtered the child and the grandchild. That's 2 violations, even if you only slaughtered, even if you succeeded in doing that through only 1 slaughter. So he is going for the total number of branches on the family tree that have been violated, not merely the number of slaughters that were committed. And that's why he argues for double penalty. Let me just get all of that explanation up on the screen so that people can read it at their leisure. Remember, you can always hit pause if you're reviewing this at home, or you can go to Sefaria and study it however you like. All right. Now, the next portion of our Mishnah here is, excuse me, a sort of a digression, but it will be important for us. At 4 periods in the year, he who sells a beast to another must inform him, right? There are 4 times during the year where you have to give special information to the buyer of the animal. We'll get to what those 4 days are, but for the moment, what do you have to say? I sold today its mother to be slaughtered, or I sold today its young to be slaughtered. So normally speaking, this is going back to your question, Natan. Normally speaking, if I'm selling two animals, even on the same day, I'm not assuming that both of them are going to be slaughtered on that day. And so I don't have to warn the buyers that someone else also bought the animal on that day. Because one of them may slaughter it today, one of them may slaughter it a year from today. I don't know. So I don't have to give any warning because I really don't know the slaughtering schedule. However, on the eve of the last day of the feast of Sukkot, meaning in preparation for Shmini Atzeret, on the eve of the first day of Pesach, on the eve of Shavuot, and on the eve of Rosh Hashanah, on those special days, I know the person is buying the animal to slaughter it today. There is like a 99% probability that that animal is going to be killed today. And if the animal is going to be killed today, then buyer number two better know that, because if he goes ahead and slaughters, then he'll be violating. But on any other day, if we don't know, if it is completely invisible to us, there is no liability and no responsibility. And this answers the question of, I'm raising cows for a living, and I sell the mother to one guy, and I sell the calf to another one, and I've got no idea what they're going to do with them. They're going to, maybe one of them is going to use it for milk, maybe one of them is going to turn it into dinner, maybe one of them is going to breed it for their own cows. Who knows? And I could sell the children from one mother to 100 different people over the lifetime of the cow. How do I know what day they're slaughtering their cow and whether or not I'm able to slaughter the mother from my farm on that day? Once it is beyond the chance of probability that they're going to be doing it that day, I'm not responsible for coordinating my slaughter with their slaughter. Now, on my farm, I am responsible for keeping track and making sure I don't avoid the mitzvah. But if I'm selling them just here and there all around, I don't have to go on Twitter and say, by the way, to everyone who bought a cow that was descended from cow number 34, I slaughtered her this morning. The rest of you are now having to wait till tomorrow. That's not happening. Natan?
Just I want to be sure, if I buy from you and cow, any other day but those four, okay, any other day, and I decide to kill the cow, okay, and I discover later, just by coincidence, because maybe, I don't know, my neighbor comment, oh, you know what, I also bought one from the same guy, and I slaughtered it, okay, and we said, maybe it was the same. We are connected, mom with the child.
Right.
Who is responsible? The buyer or the seller? Because I bought it, but why should I be responsible that I kill at the same time than my neighbor? I bought it, but no one told me about that. So I'm free of it's the same of the previous example. I only do tshuva and nothing else, correct?
Correct. You only do tshuva and nothing else. If you happen to find out later on that by freak coincidence you happened to slaughter on the same day as someone else who slaughtered it, then yes, you would do tshuva, and it would just be one of those accidental mitzvot. It happens sometimes. You could be visiting somebody and you accidentally get a $20 bill stuck to the bottom of your shoe, and you walk out of their house with it, and you don't discover it on the bottom of the shoe for 6 months, right? Total accident. You do tshuva because you did take it. Hopefully you can get them back $20, but that would just be, tshuva. Same here. If it's totally dumb luck, then it's just tshuva. But the problem in this Mishnah is that we should know on these days that somebody is going to be slaughtering it on that day. It's not maybe they'll slaughter it today, maybe not. They definitely, almost certainly, probably are.
So in my question, it's not responsible completely the owner, the previous owner, because he sold to two different people, and not on those 4 days, in a different regular day. He sold to a different people the cows, let's say in the same week. He doesn't supposed to say, hey, be careful because I saw the mom and the child in the same week, because the probability that one of them will kill is 50%. Okay.
Well, no,
So
no, no. I mean, first of all, it's not 50%, and it's not 50% of which day of the week that the killing happens on, right? Because a lot of people didn't buy the animal to kill it today. They bought the animal to make it fatter. They bought the animal to use it. They didn't, it wasn't like going to the supermarket. So, but no, the buyer is not responsible. That's what this Mishnah is telling you.
the seller. I say the seller. It's
Sorry,
not
the seller is not responsible. On any other day, the seller is not responsible to warn someone, except in a few other cases, which we're going to talk about. Let's finish the rest of the Mishnah, right? So, according to Rabbi Yossi, the Galilean, also on the eve of Yom Kippur in the Galilee. So he was very famous for saying that you should eat well on the 9th of Tishrei, the day before Yom Kippur, in order that your fast should be easy, because he believed that you shouldn't be suffering through the fast. So again, in that area, people would be eating well, they'd be eating meat on the day before Yom Kippur, so that would also be a problem day. Rabbi Yehuda says this is so only when there was no time in between the sales. But if there was time, he need not inform him, meaning that if it was really, really very close, then that might be an issue. But if there's enough wiggle room, then it's not such a problem. And Rabbi Yehuda agrees, however, meaning to the idea that there has to be a warning. If he sold the mother to the bridegroom and the young to the bride, then he must inform them of it, for it is certain that they will each slaughter on the same day. So the issue here at the bottom, the last point will really help explain the whole part of it. And I'll just scroll down again to give people a chance to read along. And that issue is, if you absolutely know that Mr. Shapiro bought the cow for his wedding, and that Miss Cohen, rather, bought the cow for her wedding, and they are getting married together, and they are going to be having their wedding party, then you are very, very confident that those cows are likely to get slaughtered on the same day, because maybe they don't know that they are actually buying from the same mother, or the mother and the young. Therefore, you would have to inform them. So yes, the seller has a responsibility if it is absolutely obvious that these two animals have a very high chance of being slaughtered on the same day. So if two people come and say, I need to buy a cow to slaughter it on Sunday because of my son's graduation, and another person says, I need to buy a cow and slaughter it on Sunday because my son's coming home from the army, then you have to tell them, number two, hey, I sold a cow from a guy who's going to slaughter it. So how about you slaughter it on Friday rather than Sunday? And that way there won't be a problem. Make sense? All right. We're going to go ahead and just finish off. I know we're running up against 8 o'clock, but this is such a carryover, even though it's not actually about slaughtering the mother and the young, that I want to go ahead and get it on the class today. At these 4 periods, meaning the 4 times that we just mentioned, a butcher can be compelled to slaughter against his will. That is to say, even if the ox was worth 1,000 dinars, and the purchaser only paid a dinar, meaning for a dinar's worth of meat, then they can force the butcher to slaughter it. Meaning it is so important for a person to be able to have meat for those holidays that if you go to the butcher and say, I'd like to buy a pound of beef, and the butcher has to slaughter a whole cow, and there's nobody else around to buy it, well, buddy, you just bought yourself a pound of meat. And in fact, if the butcher says, I won't because I think I'm going to lose money, you can get the Beit Din to force him to actually slaughter the cow and provide that dinar. Now, obviously, if there are alternative butchers, if there's a better place that you can do without causing any loss, of course, that's the better thing to do. But this is the extreme circumstance. But only on those days. Any other day of the year, you show up and say, I want a pound of beef. And he says, well, that means I have to cut up on a new cow. And I don't want to do that for only a pound. that's his cow. You can't force him to slaughter it. This might sound familiar because we did go over this before in the Bavas. However, there is a downside to this. Therefore, if the animal died, meaning before the slaughter happened, the loss is upon the purchaser, right? If you bought a pound's worth of that cow, and then that cow gets hit by a truck, then you lose your pound's worth of money. You lose your dinar because you already owned it and now it is gone because the truck took it away from you. And because you were now a partner with the main owner, you are a partner in the loss. However, on the other days of the year, if you give him 100 dinar to buy the 100 pounds of meat, if the animal died, the loss is upon the seller. Because you do not take ownership on those other days until you actually take the meat into your possession, even if you paid him that 100 dinar and then the cow got hit by a bus, he has to refund your 100 dinar. They come back to you because you didn't get the meat that was promised for them. You didn't take full possession. So on those other days when you're trying to get that 1 dinar worth of meat, you're open to more risk if the animal dies earlier than the proper slaughter. And by the vice versa, by the way, also if it turns out to be treifa, you're out of luck. And in the other days of the year, it's not your meat until the meat's in your hands. All right. See, that only took 3 minutes. We will finish up chapter 5 and begin chapter 6 next week, which is a completely different topic, by the way, which is one of the things I like about Chullin is we get different topics a little bit more regularly than some other masechets. So it's nice. All right, everyone, take care, be well.
Thank you so much, Rabbi. Rabbi, don't
Good
forget
night.
that on,
Thank you, Rabbi.
You're welcome. Good night. Yes, Natan?
I'm sorry, don't forget, Rabbi, that on Sunday, Yael will not be in DVD because it's the bowling program.
Yes, I think actually I have a couple other people bowling as well. So I think we're probably going to be canceled again.
Oh, yes, Aaron is there.
Exactly. And I think Abigail might be going too, but I'm not sure.
Yes, she texted me today because Josh told me that they will be in South Florida, and now she texted me today that she's coming. So look
Okay.
like they were change of plans.
Very good. Very good. I'm glad. And yeah, we'll just do it next week, the week after. No problem.